I'm wondering if I should use these seconds to ask you what your favorite Elvis song would be. So maybe you can just ponder. But I see we have reached 5:30. A warm welcome, everybody. Here we are from St. Michael at the Northgate Church in Oxford. And our Monday series is 7 quotes or 7 things about various individuals. Last week, the great Corrie ten Boom. The week before, Pontius Pilate, as that was Holy Week. Week before that, G.K. Chesterton. Today, Elvis. In 1953, Elvis, aged 18, went to a recording studio, Sun Records in Memphis, and laid down a track, made an acetate. And they thought it was an interesting voice, but not a lot happened. He kept going back. They weren't quite sure what they wanted from him. And then in 1954, he ended up recording a song called That's All Right, Mama. Very briefly, the story of Elvis and then the 7 points. He became very popular very quickly across the southern states, then across most of America. RCA bought out his contract from Sun Records. Colonel Tom Parker became his manager. In 1956, he produced huge hits, Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, Heartbreak Hotel, Blue Suede Shoes, and so on. Then in 1958, he was called up to join the army, and he was stationed in Germany for 2 years. By that stage, he'd also gone to Hollywood. He went to Hollywood in 56, made the film Love Me Tender, and then 3 others before he ended up in the army. During those 2 years in the army, he sang nothing professionally. Then he came out of the army in 1960, recorded an album, Elvis Is Back, as he was, and then started to make lots more films throughout the 1960s, about 3 a year. In 1968, people had sort of forgotten that he had been a great singer, enormously popular in the late 50s, and saw him as a mediocre actor, possibly slightly unfairly because he was quite a good actor, but the scripts weren't great and the songs written for the films weren't great. So his team decided he'd do a comeback special. And that in 1968 was when he wore the black leather suit, if you've ever seen clips of that. And Elvis was back, singing his old songs, singing some new songs, and then started to do live concerts again, especially in Las Vegas. And if your image of Elvis is Elvis in a white jumpsuit with lots of rhinestones and things, that's the era we then go in. He was back at the top of the tree again. But then during the mid-70s, his health declined, and sadly he died in 1977. The poster behind me there was a copy, not the original, of his final ever concert, 26th of June, 1977, and he died August the 16th, aged 42. That's the career of Elvis. Sold more records than any other individual singer. His name known throughout the world. Did the first live 7 points that we may wish to ponder. One of the things about doing this afternoon is that I'm not going to play any songs, and that feels very strange. So if afterwards you head for other YouTube channels and you look up some Elvis songs, then feel free. There are so many to choose from. He recorded a lot. 7 points we may wish to ponder. First of all, on his day, he was very persevering. As I said at the beginning, he went in aged 18 in 1953. Nobody thought a huge amount of him, but he kept going in, and eventually they recorded him properly when they found a song that really fitted him. And when he was very focused, his performances, some would say, were about the best one can imagine. But he was very ruthless at wanting to get it right. We may know the song Hound Dog. It's a fast song. It sounds as if it's just done in one take. Elvis, I think, did 31 takes of Hound Dog before he was satisfied. And likewise, some of the songs you can really sense he is putting his heart into getting it right. He was someone who, and one of the reasons was that he sang black music. And in the southern states, remember, this was the time when segregation was still quite big in the US, in the southern states. In the southern states, they didn't particularly want a white boy singing black music, and they said it much more rudely than that. The great black singer Little Richard said about him, he was an integrator. Elvis was a blessing. They wouldn't let black music through. He opened the door for black music. Elvis called white trash, again, not a polite term, but that was where he was in social status. And he didn't mind who made the music, and he didn't mind who his friends were. He just loved good music and loved good people. And so he was a unifying figure. In the film Loving You in 1957, there's just a little clip where there is a white girl dancing along to Elvis singing on stage. And next to her, there is a black boy dancing to Elvis singing on stage. That's quite unusual in a 50s film in the southern states. And Elvis just slightly recorded it in June, and just a few months after Martin Luther King had been killed in Memphis, Elvis's hometown. And the final song, If I Can Dream, has big echoes of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Then when Elvis goes back to the recording studios after that great comeback special, he records in the ghetto, and Martin Luther King had got very involved in helping people from the ghettos. And for Elvis just to sing that song, it's making a point. He was a uniting figure, an integrator, as Little Richard said, white and black. Third thing, he had down times as well as good times. As I said at the beginning, all the films in the 60s did not really do him justice, and his career went really down like that. The story is told that one young person took Elvis out and they stood on the sidewalk on the pavement together, and nobody recognized Elvis in early 68. And the young producer said, "That's where your career has got to." Elvis said in 68, "I'd like to make one good film before I leave. I know this town's laughing at me." This town meaning Hollywood. He had his down times as well as his good times. And I suppose one of the points that we can hold on to as we look at his life is that that's so reflective of our seasons as well. Sometimes we have great times, sometimes not so great times. Elvis in the late 50s, right at the top. And then the 60s went down, but then during the 70s went down again. Here is a very human figure, and people could identify with him. Fourthly, wasn't terribly good at looking after himself emotionally, but physically his diet was appalling. He ate really unhealthy things and lots of it. He also got hooked on drugs. This was probably from the army, not from rock and roll. The army, when he was given something to help him stay awake on guard duty one night, and he got addicted there. And the terrible tragedy of all those things taking effect in the early 70s. It's sometimes said of Elvis, he didn't realize how good he was. And perhaps the addiction and the bad diet and the not always treating his wife Priscilla as he should, perhaps there's something there. There's a self-destructive tendency, and sadly, that brought him to an early death. Fifth thing, there are things we do not understand. I mentioned at the beginning Tom Parker, the manager. Tom Parker said, when I first saw Elvis, he was worth $1 million. After a few months, he had $1 million. And Tom Parker was an extraordinarily successful manager in terms of getting Elvis's profile high and going for big, hard contracts and making a lot of money for Elvis and for himself. But Tom Parker wasn't interested in Elvis's music. He was just looking to ensure that the money kept flowing in. He wasn't terribly interested in Elvis's talent, and hence the tying in to the mediocre movies in the 60s. Once or twice, Elvis wondered about getting a younger person, older person, father figure stuff going on there. And writers about Elvis can't quite understand why Elvis put up with so much from the manager, from Tom Parker. I think for all of us, there are things in other people's lives which we do not quite understand, and there may be relationships or issues going on, and we can't quite grasp what's going on. Lots has been written about Tom Parker and Elvis. We don't quite understand what was going on. Tom Parker certainly made Elvis a lot of money, got him a huge profile, but it certainly at some points in Elvis's career did not do him a lot of favors. Sixthly, we have had Perseverance and Performing, which was sort of 2 in 1. We've had a uniting and integrating figure of black and white. We've had, here is a person who had downs as well as ups. We've got the self-destructive nature. We've got things we do not understand. Sixthly, he was really, really generous. He gave an enormous amount of money to charities, not only in Memphis, but he was very fond of Memphis, but further afield as well. And many stories are told of him buying cars for his entourage and seeing someone walk by, maybe an elderly lady who could never see, was a real empathy and concern for people. He had been very poor himself. His family was always poor as they were growing up. And he would often comment on the need to respect others. Later on in the 70s, in the early 70s, one of his great songs, Walk a Mile in My Shoes, and Elvis used to introduce it with these words. There was a guy who said one time, he said, "You never stood in that man's shoes, or saw things through his eyes, or stood and watched with helpless hands, while the heart inside you dies. So help your brother along the way, no matter where he starts. For the same God that made you, made him too, these men with broken hearts." I'd like to sing a song along the same lines. And he would then launch into Walk a Mile in My Shoes, having perhaps also sung In the Ghetto that night and lots of other big classics. He really did care for people. He felt that every single person had a value, and he was very generous to them personally, so much that Elvis was full of faith. He loved to warm up by singing gospel songs before his big concerts. When he was very little, his family used to go to a Pentecostal church, and people think that's where Elvis used to love to see the enthusiasm and the passion in the singing. His favorite sort of singers were often gospel quartets, and he loved listening to them. And later in the concerts, he would have a gospel quartet or members from gospel quartets as part of his backing group. And for him, faith was what he turned to when life really felt very bad. One of his great songs is called Help Me, and it's a prayer. And it's said that he recorded it in 1973 when emotionally the engineers kept splicing the songs to try and get something. And then someone handed Elvis the prayer, Help Me, and he sang it in one take. And it said he fell to his knees halfway through and kept singing. He believed that the God who loved him would look after him no matter what. It's said that there's one moment when fans called out to Elvis on stage, "Elvis, you're the king." And he said something like, "That's very kind of you, but I feel a little bit awkward because Jesus is the king." He said once, "I believe in the Bible. I believe that all good things come from God. I don't believe I'd sing the way I do if God hadn't wanted me to." He was not arrogant about his singing gift, his performing gift. He did see it as a gift from God, and he knew that it made other people happy, and he was prepared to keep on singing. So, 7 points. Someone full of faith, someone very generous, someone who did things that no one quite understands, had relationships we can't quite work out what was going on. Someone who sadly had a little bit of a self-destruct streak. Someone who had bad seasons, barren seasons, as well as really good ones, but he kept on going. Someone who integrated and united, and very quietly, I think, really did quite a lot for civil rights. And someone who, on his day, was prepared to persevere and get things right. For the 68 comeback special, people were worried about Elvis's career. Tom Parker wanted him to do a Christmas special, just lots of Christmas songs, sitting wearing, in effect, a nice sweater and with the open fire and doing the normal Christmas special stuff. The young producer, Steve Binder, said, "We need something different. We need Elvis to be himself." And so got Elvis's old friends, his first ever backing band, to sit with him on a very small stage, very intimate with the audience just around, and said, "Elvis, you just be yourself. and we will roll the cameras, then we'll try and pull something from that. And Elvis, given the freedom to be himself, electrified all those who were watching and electrified all those who were then watching on TV. Elvis, perhaps at his best when he was being himself, recognized and knowing that the gifts he had were from God. And thank you very much for listening this evening. 7 points about Elvis, but do head off and now listen to some of the great songs, whether it's the early stuff, That's All Right, Heartbreak Hotel, All Shook Up, or maybe some of those early 60s classics, Can't Help Falling in Love, Reconsider Baby, one of the best blues songs ever done. Late 60s, Suspicious Minds, In the Ghetto, early 70s, and maybe even to his last album, Moody Blue, and the song that was in the charts when he died, Way Down. Thank you very much. Have a very good Monday evening.